I'm standing in the grand hall of the Carter estate. Sunlight pours through towering windows, spilling gold across mahogany floors polished to a mirror shine. A hush has fallen over the room, because every single member of my family is staring at me, as though I'm an unwelcome stranger who's somehow wandered in off the street. My Uncle Charles, my cousins Brandon and Lauren, all of them dressed in tailored suits, designer dresses, diamonds flashing under the crystal chandeliers. Their eyes burn with the same look, pity and contempt. And right now they have no idea that everything they thought they knew about me is about to shatter. I can hear my own pulse thudding in my ears as I raise the thick leather folder in my hand. And my voice slices through the silence. You all think I'm just the family's charity case, the girl with the 10-year-old Chevy who's barely scraping by. My uncle shifts in his seat, his jaw tight. My cousin Brandon lets out a low laugh, glancing at Lauren, who rolls her eyes. But I keep going, because they need to hear this. You've mocked me, underestimated me, ignored me at these family meetings for years. I open the folder and pull out a single document, crisp official, stamped with a golden seal. But today I'm going to show you exactly who owns the roof over your heads, and who's been your landlord all this time. Gasps ripple through the room. Chairs scrape back across the floor as my cousins lean forward, eyes wide. My Uncle Charles grips the table so hard his knuckles turn white. I take a slow breath, steadying my voice, feeling every ounce of rage and resolve I've carried for a decade rise to the surface. Because for the first time in my life, I'm done hiding, and the secrets I'm about to reveal will change this family forever. My name is Samantha Carter. Most people just call me Sam. I'm 33 years old. And if you passed me on the street in Philadelphia, you'd probably never guess I was a Carter at all. Because while my family has been plastered across society pages and business magazines for decades, I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment near Fairmount Park, drive an old navy blue Chevy Malibu that rattles when it idles, and wear clothes that come from discount racks instead of designer boutiques. But the truth is, appearances have never meant much to me. Not after everything I've seen and everything I've lost. When I was 16, my parents were killed in a car accident on the icy highway between Philly and Lancaster, and my entire world shattered in a single phone call. My grandmother Margaret Carter took me in, a woman whose very name in Philadelphia commanded respect. She wasn't just the matriarch of the Carter family. She was the mastermind behind Carter Realty, a real estate empire that began with a single row house in West Philadelphia and grew into towers piercing the city skyline. But even as she signed multi-million-dollar deals and sat on charity boards, Grandma Margaret lived by one unshakable rule. Real wealth should be silent and purposeful, not flashy, not loud, not something you use to crush other people under your heel. And in those years I lived with her, I learned things no school could have taught me. She'd make me sit beside her at the huge oak desk in her study, running her fingers over property portfolios, explaining zoning laws, showing me how to read market trends like they were secret maps. And late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd find her in the rose garden, whispering that the Carter name was supposed to stand for integrity, not just wealth. But the rest of my family didn't see things that way, and that has made all the difference in the person I've become. I remember the first night I moved into the Carter estate. I was 16, numb from grief, shivering under the weight of a black wool coat 2 sizes too big. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, the housekeeper who'd served the family for over 30 years, met me at the door, pulled me into a hug that smelled like lemon polish and cinnamon cookies, and whispered, "Your grandmother's waiting for you in the study." I found Grandma Margaret sitting behind her massive desk, bathed in the glow of the brass lamp, glasses perched low on her nose as she scribbled notes on a legal pad. She looked up, eyes gentle but sharp as glass. "Come here, Samantha," she said softly, beckoning me closer. She didn't waste time with empty condolences. Instead, she slid a leather-bound ledger across the desk and opened it to a blank page. "We're going to start your education. Real wealth isn't about what people see. It's about what you build quietly while everyone else is busy showing off." At first, I thought she was crazy, teaching me about cash flow statements and zoning laws when my heart still felt raw and bloody. But over time, it became our ritual. Mornings started with financial newspapers spread across the breakfast table. Afternoons, she'd take me into Center City, pointing out buildings Carter Realty had bought decades ago, explaining how neighborhoods change like tides. She'd say, "Never chase the spotlight, Sam. The real money is made in the shadows. But while I clung to her lessons, my cousins were living a different reality entirely. Brandon, Lauren, they were practically royalty at prep schools in Bryn Mawr and Chestnut Hill. Brandon got a brand new silver Mercedes convertible for his 16th birthday. Lauren flew to Paris over spring break just to shop the new couture lines. Meanwhile, I was driving my parents' old Chevy working weekends at a coffee shop downtown and keeping my head down. Even inside the Carter estate, I felt like a guest instead of family. Dinner conversations were dominated by talk of gala fundraisers, art auctions, and boardroom triumphs. But my chair always felt just a little bit outside the circle. One Christmas, I remember Brandon holding up the vintage Rolex he'd just unwrapped, flashing it under the chandelier light. He leaned over to me and whispered, "Hey Sam, maybe if you're lucky Charles will hire you as a secretary someday." Lauren smirked, glancing at my plain wool dress, and chimed in. "Or a tour guide. You could show visitors around the mansion. Give them a poor relation experience." Their laughter felt like knives sliding under my skin. But Grandma, she saw the look in my eyes. Later that night, she came to my room, sat beside me on the window seat that overlooked the frosted rose garden, and said, "One day, Sam, the ones who mock you now will stand in rooms you own. Patience and silence are your sharpest weapons." Her words burned into my memory like a brand. And as the years passed, I realized she wasn't just teaching me how to protect wealth. She was teaching me how to protect myself. When I left for college, Grandma hugged me tight, pressing a slim envelope into my hand. Inside was a check for $25,000 and a note in her delicate cursive. "This isn't for spending, it's for building." While Brandon and Lauren blew through their inheritances on condos and club memberships, I invested every penny, slowly, quietly. While everyone else was too busy laughing at my thrift store clothes, I was becoming the woman Grandma always believed I could be. It was late September, the air crisp with the first bite of fall, when the Carter family gathered at the estate for our annual family conference. It used to be a weekend of warm dinners, laughter echoing through the halls, my grandmother Margaret presiding over the table with a quiet grace that commanded respect. But ever since she passed, the conference had twisted into something else entirely. Now, it was a battlefield, a stage for flexing status and wealth. The driveway outside the mansion gleamed with Bentley's Range Rovers and Aston Martins lined up like soldiers on parade. I pulled in slowly between Brandon's electric blue Ferrari and Lauren's gleaming white Porsche Cayenne, my navy blue Chevy looking like it had accidentally wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Inside, the grand foyer buzzed with chatter. Crystal chandeliers sent fractured light skipping across floors of polished black marble. My Uncle Charles held court near the base of the sweeping staircase, shaking hands with developers and financial advisors like a senator on the campaign trail. I tried to slip past unnoticed, but Charles spotted me instantly. "Well, if it isn't Samantha," he called out, voice dripping with forced warmth. "How's life in, Fairmount Park these days?" I forced a polite smile. "It's peaceful, quiet, just how I like it." Charles's grin tightened, his eyes flicking down to my simple navy dress. Peaceful, or a little too small for someone with the Carter name. I ignored the bait. But behind me, Brandon's voice piped up. "Hey, Sam, did your car make it up the hill all right? Mine has launch control for slopes like that." Laughter rippled around the foyer. Lauren smirked as she adjusted her diamond earrings, eyes sliding over my outfit. "Well, I guess there's something to be said for humility," she murmured. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks appeared at my side, gently touching my arm. "Miss Samantha, Mr. Charles wants everyone seated in the library in 15 minutes. I nodded, swallowing the bitter taste rising in my throat. The library, once Grandma Margaret's sanctuary, had been transformed for the conference. Rows of antique books were pushed aside to make room for digital projectors, architectural renderings, thick portfolios stacked high on tables embossed with the Carter crest. As I stepped inside, I could feel eyes following me, like I was an intruder in a place I was supposed to call home. Charles cleared his throat and raised a glass of scotch. "Family, welcome. This year, we have big plans." He launched into a speech about expansion, how Carter Realty was poised to dominate the East Coast market, how brand image was everything in the modern age. Behind him, a projector flickered to life, casting images of sleek glass towers across the walls. And speaking of image, Charles continued, his gaze drifting pointedly toward me, We must ensure every member of this family reflects the standards we've worked so hard to build. Brandon leaned over to Lauren, whispering loudly enough for me and everyone else to hear. I'm sure Sam's old Chevy is great for the family brand. Lauren gave a sharp little laugh, covering her mouth with manicured fingers. Charles raised his hands for silence. But let's get to the big announcement. He clicked to the next slide, and my heart lurched as a high-resolution image of the Carter estate filled the screen. The mansion, its white columns framed by perfect rose gardens, glowed under the soft golden hour sun. This property, Charles said, voice heavy with significance, has been in our family for 4 generations. It's now sitting on prime real estate, 5 acres in the heart of Philadelphia, worth an estimated $55 million. Gasps and low whistles rippled through the room. Brandon sat up straighter. Lauren's eyes glimmered with excitement. Charles continued, I've been in discussions with developers. They're interested in purchasing the estate and transforming it into luxury condominiums. We're talking private penthouses, valet services, infinity pools. He let the words hang in the air, savoring the effect. Then he added, the projected returns could boost each of your asset portfolios by 7 figures, at minimum. The room erupted into eager murmurs. Lauren clasped her hands together. Oh my God, imagine having our name on the most exclusive address in Philadelphia. Brandon laughed. I'll take a penthouse, as long as there's a wine cellar and a garage big enough for the Ferrari. Charles lifted his hand. But of course, any decision must be voted on. And as you know, our family voting structure is weighted by each person's declared assets, which meant Charles held nearly 40% of the votes. Brandon and Lauren held another 30 combined. My stake sat at a mere 2%. A hush fell, as Charles shifted his attention back to me. Sam, I understand this place has sentimental value for you. He offered a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. But sentiment doesn't pay property taxes or keep our brand relevant in this market. I opened my mouth to speak, but Lauren cut me off, voice sweet as poisoned honey. We all respect your history here, Sam, but this is business. I'm sure you understand. Brandon leaned forward, smirking. And hey, maybe if this goes through, you can afford a car made this decade. The laughter that followed echoed off the library's vaulted ceiling, cold as glass. And as I sat there, staring at my grandmother's face in the giant photo on the screen, I realized something deep in my chest. These people had no clue who they were laughing at. Not yet, but they were about to find out. The following morning, the family reconvened in the Carter estate's grand drawing room, a space that smelled faintly of old wood polish and expensive perfume. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching motes of dust swirling in the hush as everyone took their places in a semicircle of high-backed chairs. Charles stood at the front, crisp gray suit tailored to perfection, a gold tie clip gleaming at his chest. All right, family, he began with a broad, practiced smile. It's time for individual financial updates. As you know, our family image is only as strong as the success of every member. I felt the room tighten, the air go sharp as glass, because this was the real purpose of these meetings. To lay bare who had climbed higher and who had fallen behind. Brandon went first. He swaggered to the front of the room, clearing his throat dramatically. So, this year, I officially became Senior Vice President at Carter Realty. He shot a grin at Charles, who nodded approvingly. And I picked up a few new assets. A vacation home in Aspen. Gasps and envious sighs floated through the room. Plus a Ferrari SF90, limited edition, only 25 shipped to the States this year. He held up his phone to show photos of himself leaning against a sleek electric blue sports car. Lauren clapped daintily. Brandon, that's gorgeous. Brandon winked at her. I figured I'd treat myself. We only live once, right? He slid back into his chair, smugness radiating off him like heat. Lauren glided up next, tossing her silky hair over her shoulder. This year, I added several pieces to my art collection. 2 from emerging artists in Brooklyn, 1 from a gallery in LA. Valuations have already doubled. She lifted her chin. And I secured early admission for my twins to the Bancroft Academy, even though the wait list is 5 years long. More polite applause. Charles leaned forward, beaming. Excellent, Lauren. Now that is the Carter legacy. Then, as if a switch flipped, The warmth evaporated from his eyes as he turned to me. "And, Samantha, what about you?" Silence slammed into the room. Every pair of eyes pinned me to my seat. I rose, smoothing my dress with trembling fingers, feeling heat rising in my cheeks. "Well, I began, voice as steady as I could manage. I've continued my work as an independent financial consultant, and I've been focused on some investments that..." Brandon burst out laughing before I could finish. "Oh, come on, Sam. Financial consultant. What does that even mean, filing taxes for your neighbors?" A ripple of snickers broke out across the room. Lauren tilted her head, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Or maybe she's giving budget tips. You know, how to make a Chevy last another decade." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to keep talking. "My investments have been growing, quietly, and..." Charles cut in, his voice soft, but edged like a blade. "Sam, it's okay to admit that you need help. This family takes care of its own." He glanced around the room for approval. "And perhaps it's time you accepted that you might simply not have the same aptitude for business as the rest of us." Lauren crossed her legs, swinging her foot lazily. "Yeah, I mean, maybe this just isn't your world, Sam. There's no shame in that." Brandon leaned forward, eyes glinting. "You could always marry rich. That's still a valid strategy." Laughter exploded through the room, sharp and cruel. Even Charles chuckled under his breath. My vision blurred. 100 comebacks warred inside me, but my voice refused to work. Aunt Valerie, who'd been quiet until now, cleared her throat delicately. "Sam, dear, have you ever considered taking some etiquette classes or updating your wardrobe? A little first impressions mean everything, especially if you ever want to, you know, move up." I stared at her, numb, as the blood pounded in my ears. Lauren leaned closer, her perfume sharp and floral. "Seriously, Sam, do you even have a plan, or are you just drifting?" Brandon waved his phone in the air. "Guys, can we just agree? Sam's net worth is probably less than my car's down payment." The laughter turned savage, echoing around the high ceilings like a chorus of knives. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, standing at the back, caught my eye, her expression soft with pity. But pity was the last thing I wanted. I clenched my fists, my nails digging crescents into my palms, because even as my family tore me apart, piece by piece, I felt something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. A quiet fury. A resolve forged in every sleepless night I'd spent studying market trends, running numbers until my eyes ached. They thought they were humiliating me, crushing me under their perfect designer shoes. But they were only fueling the fire I'd kept hidden for so long. Charles finally lifted a hand, quieting the laughter. "Enough, everyone. Let's move on to the discussion of the mansion sale." He turned to me, voice softening again into false concern. "Sam, I know you loved this house, but business is business, and we have to think about the future. I hope you'll understand." I forced my voice to stay calm, though my insides were shaking. Grandma Margaret wanted this place to remain a gathering place for family, not just another luxury condo. Brandon rolled his eyes. "Oh God, here we go. The grandma legacy speech." Lauren tossed her hair. "Exactly. This isn't the nostalgia business, Sam. It's real estate." Charles cut in sharply. "That's enough. We'll take a preliminary vote after lunch." As everyone stood to file out, Brandon muttered under his breath, "Can't wait to hear how Sam's gonna pay her share of the property taxes, with coupons maybe." More laughter. And as the doors closed behind me, I pressed my palm flat to the cool wood paneling, breath shaking in my chest. But deep inside, one truth burned clear as crystal. They were about to find out just how little they knew about me. That afternoon, while the rest of my family lingered over rare steaks and fine wine in the dining room, I slipped quietly upstairs to the bedroom that used to be mine when I was 16. I closed the door, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The pale cream walls and heavy drapes hadn't changed in 17 years, and neither had the scent of lavender sachets tucked into the drawers. But on the mahogany desk by the window sat a thick envelope. I'd asked Mr. Jacob Ellis to courier it overnight. He'd been my grandmother's lawyer, and for the last decade, he'd been mine. With trembling fingers, I tore open the envelope, spreading the contents across the desk. Property deeds, corporate filings, financial statements, all crisp and meticulously organized. This was my secret, my quiet empire. After college, while Brandon and Lauren were buying condos with floor-to-ceiling windows and hosting cocktail parties, I was working nights as a financial analyst downtown and living in a cramped walk-up apartment. I'd saved every spare dime, pouring it into a tiny duplex in Northern Liberties. I'd lived in one half, rented out the other. 2 years later, I sold that building for nearly double what I'd paid, and rolled the profits into 2 more properties, this time in a neighborhood everyone else still called sketchy. But I'd seen the signs: the new coffee shop, the yoga studio opening next door, the steady climb in traffic at the subway stop 2 blocks away. I learned to spot the glow of future value where others saw only boarded windows. And quietly, methodically, I kept building. While my cousins were flaunting Italian leather shoes and custom suits, I was sitting up until 2 in the morning, reading zoning maps and economic reports, memorizing market trends. I built a network of shell corporations, each layer shielding my name from public records. Jacob helped me set up LLCs, trusts, even offshore entities when necessary. No one, not even Charles, could trace the holdings back to me. By my 28th birthday, I owned 7 properties. By 30, 12. And now, at 33, I held title to 14 residential buildings and 4 commercial properties in the hottest pockets of Philadelphia. But the crown jewel was Independence Tower, a luxury apartment complex right in the heart of Rittenhouse Square, where the penthouses rented for $20,000 a month. The same building where, as fate would have it, Brandon and Lauren now lived, and they had no clue that every check they signed was addressed to one of my holding companies, that I was their landlord. Over the past year, I'd authorized discreet renovations in Independence Tower, new security systems, a complete lobby redesign, all while maintaining rents well below market rates, because I didn't believe in squeezing tenants dry for short-term gain. But listening to my family plotting to pressure whoever owned that building into selling made my blood boil, because the truth was, I wasn't just some poor cousin living paycheck to paycheck. I was worth $73 million, more than Brandon, Lauren, and half my other cousins combined. And I'd kept it hidden, because Grandma Margaret had taught me that sometimes. The loudest power is the quietest one. But after today, my silence was over. By Monday morning, the air inside the Carter estate felt charged, crackling with a nervous electricity. Sunlight spilled across the library's towering shelves, casting long golden stripes over leather-bound books and polished tables. Charles stood at the head of the room, tapping a silver pen against the ledger in front of him. "All right, family," he began, voice ringing with authority. "Before we sign the agreements for the mansion sale and discuss that mysterious apartment owner," he shot me a quick dismissive glance, "let's make sure all votes are in order." Brandon sat sprawled in his chair, fingers drumming impatiently on the table. Lauren was fussing with her pearl necklace, glancing toward the projector as though she couldn't wait for the signatures and the payout. Charles raised his chin. "We stand on the edge of a new era for the Carter family. The deal with Westbrook Developments could increase our collective net worth by millions. I'm ready to sign. I assume everyone else is as well." A ripple of eager murmurs swept through the room. Brandon leaned forward. "Let's do it. I've already called a realtor about a penthouse in Miami." Lauren flashed a brilliant smile. "And I'm picturing a sculpture garden on the rooftop. It'll be so on brand for us." Charles spread his hands wide. "Excellent. Let's prepare the final documents." I rose slowly from my chair. My voice, clear and calm, cut through the chatter like a knife. "Actually, before anyone signs, I have something to share." The entire room froze. Charles blinked at me, annoyance flickering across his face. "Samantha, we're in the middle of..." I stepped forward, my leather portfolio clutched in my hands, my pulse pounding like war drums in my ears. "I promise this won't take long." I placed the folder on the table, flipped it open, and pulled out a single sheet of paper, embossed with gold lettering and an official seal. And I lifted my chin. "For years, I've listened to you all talk about how I'm the family's embarrassment, the poor cousin, the charity case who doesn't belong at this table." Brandon shifted in his seat. Lauren's smile faltered. Charles narrowed his eyes. I held up the document for everyone to see. "But I've been busy," Charles scoffed. "What is this?" "Another of your little investments." I kept my voice steady. "This is a comprehensive valuation of my current holdings, Properties, commercial real estate, investments. I handed the document to Charles's assistant. Put it on the projector, please. A few moments later, the screen behind Charles flickered to life. Rows of numbers and addresses glowed under the crystal chandelier. Brandon leaned forward, squinting at the figures. Lauren covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Charles stared at the screen, the color slowly draining from his face. $73 million, my net worth, in bold letters at the top. Brandon choked out a nervous laugh. This has to be a joke. I looked him dead in the eye. It's no joke. While you were busy buying cars and vacation homes, I was building a real estate portfolio that outperforms most of yours combined. Charles stood up so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. You're lying. You couldn't possibly have acquired this much without us knowing. I flipped to the next page in my folder. And yet, I did. Quietly. Because Grandma Margaret taught me that the most powerful moves are the ones no one sees coming. I stepped closer, eyes locked on Charles. And about that apartment complex you've been trying to find the owner of Independence Tower. Lauren sucked in a sharp breath. Brandon's mouth dropped open. I laid another document on the table, the title deed shining under the lights. I own it. Gasps burst from every corner of the room. Brandon bolted upright. No way, I live there. I nodded slowly. I know your rent checks go straight to one of my holding companies. Lauren was shaking. So, all those construction noises and the new lobby, that was you? Yes, because I care about maintaining the property's value and keeping it safe. Charles staggered backward, gripping the table. This changes nothing. The votes for the mansion sale are already counted. I pulled out one last document, the incorporation papers for Margaret's Legacy Trust. As of this morning, I've transferred my entire portfolio into this trust, which now owns a controlling interest in Jacob Ellis Development, and Jacob Ellis Development owns 30% of Carter Realty. Charles's eyes widened, pure disbelief etched on his face. That's impossible. I stepped forward until I was inches from him. You've all been so busy laughing at me, you never bothered to look closer. As of this morning, I control 37% of Carter Realty. The room fell utterly silent. Brandon sat down hard, staring blankly at the table. Lauren blinked back tears. Charles sank into his chair, looking like a man who'd just watched his empire crumble in slow motion. I lifted my chin. The mansion sale is off the table. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it felt like it might snap. And going forward, this family will remember that wealth isn't a trophy. It's a tool. And I'm going to use it to honor Grandma Margaret's legacy, whether you stand with me or not. For several long seconds, the library felt frozen, as though the entire room was struggling to catch its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, Brandon gave a short, strangled laugh, shaking his head like he was trying to wake from a bad dream. Sam, you can't just swoop in and change everything we've all built this together. I turned toward him, calm, steady. No, Brandon, you built an image. I built a foundation. Brandon opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lauren pushed her chair back, her face pale, voice trembling. So, all this time, you were rich and you just lived like some regular person. I nodded slowly. I lived how I wanted, not how the family expected. She swallowed hard, eyes shining with tears. But why didn't you tell us? I met her gaze. Because it wasn't your business, and you never asked. Charles leaned forward, gripping the table edge, voice low and hoarse. You think this makes you some kind of hero. You think this changes the rules. I held his stare. It changes everything. Because now, you don't get to decide alone what happens to Grandma's legacy. Charles's eyes darted away, his jaw tightening as he fought for control. Across the room, Aunt Valerie shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Well, Samantha, dear, perhaps we were a bit harsh, but we're family, and we should work together. Don't you think? I tilted my head, letting the silence stretch. Family means respect, not just blood. Brandon looked like he might protest again, but instead, he dropped his gaze to the table, shoulders slumping. Lauren reached for my hand, hesitated, then pulled hers back. And Charles stared at me with eyes that were suddenly calculating, as though already searching for the next move. But I didn't care anymore, because for the first time in my life, I was standing in this house, not as the poor relation, but as the woman who now held the Carter legacy in her hands. And whether they accepted it or not, I wasn't giving it back. That evening, long after the family conference had ended, Charles sat alone in the library, shadows swallowing the corners of the room. He stared at the glowing embers in the fireplace, his expression carved from granite. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. A voice answered softly on the other end. "Mr. Carter." Charles leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "I want every corporate entity tied to Samantha Carter identified. Find her shell companies. Track every wire transfer, every deed. I don't care how deep you have to dig." The voice replied, "Understood, sir. Discretion." Charles's eyes glinted cold in the firelight. "Of course, and if we find something, we'll use it. We can't let her consolidate power." Meanwhile, in my old bedroom upstairs, I was on a secure video call with Mr. Jacob Ellis. "They're coming for you, Sam," he said gravely. "I know," I replied, eyes narrowing. "And they're about to find out that I've built this empire to be bulletproof." I leaned closer to the screen. "If they push me, I'll go public. A press conference, the full story, every deal, every dollar, all legal, all mine." Jacob nodded slowly. "And that would put them in a very bad light." I smiled, a thin, fierce smile. "Exactly. Because if this family thinks they can bully me into silence, they're about to learn. I'm done being the girl who keeps quiet." Days later, I stood in the rose garden at the Carter estate, the autumn breeze rustling through crimson petals around me. Reporters gathered on the lawn, cameras flashing as I stepped up to the podium. I cleared my throat, my voice carrying strong and clear. "From this day forward, the Carter estate will no longer be for sale." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I continued, "Instead, this house will become the headquarters of the Margaret Carter Foundation, dedicated to providing financial education and supporting entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities across Philadelphia." A gasp of surprise echoed through the reporters. I smiled, warmth filling my chest. My grandmother believed that true wealth is using what you have to lift others. Later that afternoon, Charles approached me cautiously, his voice suddenly silky. "Samantha, perhaps the family could participate in this foundation as partners." I folded my arms, eyes locked on his. "You mean, so you can polish your image? Maybe clean up the mess from trying to force me out?" He flushed, but forced a thin smile. "It would look good for all of us." I tilted my head, a spark of mischief in my voice. "Then you're welcome, as volunteers. No pay, no titles, just service." Charles blinked, stunned into silence. And for the first time in my life, I watched my family speechless, while I stood, finally, in my own power. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops of Philadelphia, I wandered back into the rose garden, the same place where Grandma Margaret once whispered secrets about life and money among the blooming petals. I stood beneath the twisting vines, breathing in the scent of earth and fading blossoms, feeling the cool breeze brush my skin. I thought about the years I'd spent hiding, shrinking, letting my family define who I was, and I realized I didn't owe them silence anymore. I glanced toward the mansion, its brick walls glowing softly under the last rays of daylight. Grandma always said, "The problem with showing off your money is that you're too busy spending it instead of growing it." She was right. But she also taught me something deeper. True wealth isn't about what you own. It's about the freedom to be who you are, without fear. Now, I finally understood. My worth was never tied to a bank balance, or the brand of car I drove, or whether I was invited to my cousin's gala events. It was in the choices I made, the integrity I held, and the lives I could touch because of the quiet empire I'd built. So here's what I've learned. Never let anyone else define your value. Don't mistake loud success for real success. And remember, the most powerful move is often the one no one sees coming. I glanced up at the stars peeking through the twilight sky and whispered softly, "I hope I made you proud, Grandma." Then, with a small, fierce smile, I turned back toward the mansion, ready for whatever came next. And to anyone listening, I have a question. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? Tell me your story. I'd love to hear it.